I'm going to attempt something this evening that's very difficult. A family of Ralph Nader recognizing his determination, his creativity, his imagination to envision a future that's different than what we've got, in this case for tort law, but in many other areas of life. And I would like for our family to toast him tonight. To Ralph, our brother, our nephew, our, what else is he, Laura? But a wonderful man in our midst, and we embrace him and we welcome him to the area that he's chosen to work in. And thank you very much for coming. And I raise a toast without champagne, but you have champagne in your glass. To Ralph. Without whom we would not be sitting here tonight. And that doesn't mean that we do not thank all of you for your support, your ability to envision the future for tort law and other areas of law. So we are truly a society under the rule of law. Thank you very much.
As I said earlier, my name is Richard Newman, and I am honored to be the Executive Director of the American Museum of Tort Law. And thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. When I first heard about the museum, I thought, and then later said to Ralph, that I thought it was a brilliant idea and long overdue. And brilliant because there is no museum like this. No museum that encompasses an area of life so broadly that affects every citizen in this country, with trial by jury and tort law in particular. It is simply a brilliant conception. And now it has become a reality. Thank you to, in particular, to the founders who shared Ralph's vision and have given generously not only of their money, but their input and their ideas, and have supported this museum from its inception to its creation. The founders are all listed on the program that you have at your seat. Not all of them are here tonight, but many of them are, and I would like to acknowledge them. I apologize in advance. I'm not sure I will list everyone who's here, but from the bottom of my heart, I thank all of the founders, all of you, but all of the founders. Those that are here tonight, from what I understand, are Bob Kerrigan, David Boone, Jim Butler, Joan Claybrook, Greg Kafuri, Sal Liccardo, Claire Nader, Professor Joe Page, Edward Ricci, Sam Simon on behalf of the Early Naders Raiders, Marta Tolado from Consumer Reports, and of course, Ralph Nader. So thank you all. Wait, late-breaking development. Joan Siff, daughter of Ed Schwartz. Yes. But wait. I received earlier today an email that I would like to share with you, assuming that we get email reception. If not, I'm waiting. Yes. When I was trying cases, this was always the wish. You wait for an exhibit to load or a video to play, and it takes forever, and you're fumphering around here. And I haven't found it. William Chernoff, who could not be here, sends his congratulations, his felicitations, and expresses his undying support for Ralph and the museum and wishes he could be here with us. So he is another founder, and I'm speaking on behalf to say congratulations to all of us. As I said, I think the museum is a brilliant concept, and when you see it tomorrow, I hope that you will be impressed. I think you will be impressed. Just to review the schedule very briefly, the museum is open at 9:30 for the assembled people here to go through in advance of the dedication, which is being held in the Methodist Church immediately next door to the museum. Also at 9:30, the social room in the Methodist Church will be open with coffee and refreshments. The tricky part is, don't bring the coffee and refreshments into the museum. No. But enjoy the museum, enjoy the coffee and refreshments, and then the dedication will occur at 11. The reason I say I think the museum will impress you is because the cases selected by Professor Joe Page with Ralph's help and John Richards' help are important, significant landmark cases in the area of tort law, and I think will inform and educate and inspire the people who come to the museum or learn about the museum on the website. But as I said, the other half of my initial comment to Ralph was that this museum is overdue. Because as the tort lawyers in this nation know, tort law is everywhere and always under attack by those who are seeking to ration justice, seeking to limit access to the court, seeking to limit the rights of citizens to seek redress for the wrongs that are inflicted upon them. With your help, with the help of the other founders, with the help of other lawyers, with the help of public citizens around this country, I hope that this museum will continue to grow so that we can achieve our full vision, a massive, impressive web presence aimed not only at the public, but at scholars and practitioners, and as the museum's reputation grows, a voice for tort law and trial lawyers and civil justice. And not only that, an expansion. As you see here, we want to have phase 2, which will be an additional building with the courtroom of the future, and if funding permits, traveling exhibits so that we can take the museum around the country to the people. High schools, colleges, law schools, law days, anywhere and everywhere, county fairs. People need to be educated about the central role that tort law and trial lawyers and trial by jury play in this country. And with your help, the museum will be able to do that. Once again, I'm honored to be serving as the executive director, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Rick. It's a great pleasure to have him as executive director, because one of the first things he said was, how high are the horizons going to be? This could be a huge educational and communications institution in today's internet age, definitely. But for other reasons as well, is that the evolution of museum design has figured out how to make visual and informative abstract concepts of law. And I think that's a real breakthrough, because there is no law museum, as far as we know, in the entire world. There's a gangster museum in Mexico. But there are 35,000 museums. There are many medical museums, timber museums, museums on almost every fruit, vegetable, sport, collectible, not a single law museum, which of course also reflects something about our profession. I don't know what it exactly means, but we talk about being the rule of law, and there's no institution to inform the people. It's really interesting. When people get cornered by the law, they're often told by the judge, ignorance of the law is no excuse. So what do? We make sure that people are ignorant of the law. And it's not taught in high school, it's not taught in college, in a more general way rather than a technical, practitioner-oriented manner. the museum came about because of a whole lineage of circumstances that wove themselves into what you're going to see tomorrow. And it started out with my father and mother. They had a restaurant on Main Street. The courtroom for the county was a block down. And when I'd be in a restaurant, all of a sudden, a bunch of people would walk in unison. And I say, Dad, who are these people? And he says, well, they're the jurors on lunch. And so he took me down to the courtroom, and I just sat there, and somehow, maybe by accident, I equated lawyers with justice. So, and then I was blessed by being the youngest of 4 children, so I learned a lot from my brother Shaft, Claire, who's put hundreds of hours in on this, Laura, who has studied comparative law and dispute resolution in all kinds of contexts around the world, says this is the best tort system in the world with all its warts, and we should be able to articulate why, and maybe we'll do more of that tomorrow. And then, of course, in the lineage here, the longevity sequence, we start with Joe Page, who selected these cases, and can't believe what it took back and forth with John, Richard, and others to hone them down. What do you select? What don't you select? What are the real biggest precedent cases? They may be important, but they're not significant from precedential point of view. So we had 2 categories, court cases of precedent and cases of significance that you'll see tomorrow. And Joe is a very humble person. He was in my law school. He's a very humble person, and it's affected his posture, but we'll get him up in that way. The next one on the lineage was Marlene Thorpe and Joan Claybrook. They connected with our groups in Washington in the mid-'60s, and they've been at it ever since. That's real stamina, and we're very pleased they're here tonight. Joan, of course, went on to head NHTSA and is always on the ramparts on the going after the tortfeasors lobby. Fred Hyde was, Dr. Fred Hyde is here. We gave him the assignment right at the inception of the idea. He prepared a very nice briefing book, a plan that produced a lot of moss, unfortunately. And the reason why this museum took so long, and the reason why it's now a reality, is purely a function of who returned our calls and the larger number of people who didn't return our calls. That's what it really comes down to. If you want to just reduce it to that, it's returning calls and showing up. That's why my favorite denomination currency is a $2 bill. If you look on the other side of the $2 bill, as the men who showed up for the Declaration of Independence and signed their death warrant, they believed, when they challenged King George. And aren't we glad they showed up with all their warts? And it's all about showing up. If we increased our showing up multiple, we could change the country in every way possible. But it really comes down to something that simple. John Richard is always there. The stamina of John Richard is, see what I mean? See Eric? I'm sure without looking, he's got a red face. He has a passion for anonymity, and his blowing his top and losing his temper with the infrequency of Halley's Comet. Some people know what that means. There's also, in the lineage, the people who were the designers. Ben Lawless, who passed away, unfortunately, really had tremendous excitement when he learned about what we were doing. and Jerry Eisterhold and their associates carried on. And the fabricators are Maltby and iZone. And the construction company was down the road, O&G. It's interesting, they actually took an interest in the substance. It wasn't just another building. It was interesting. And that's how compelling tort law is. Why? Because it affects everybody. Who hasn't been or seen a car crash or side effect of medicine, flammable fabric, toxic pollution, hospital irregularities, workplace hazards. That's why it resonates, and that's why I think we're going to be good at communicating it. The graphic artist for a lot of the key cases is Matt Worker, so you may have seen his work. And then there's the editor of the Corporate Crime Reporter, Russell Mokhiber, who's shown that a lot of crimes are torts and a lot of torts are crimes. So they are very much connected. Some people think that crimes are for the government to prosecute, but not civil action. But as we know, civil actions are extremely important in preceding the flow of information to the public. We have some terrific trial lawyers here. I can't keep and name them all, but I think they share one thing in common, an incredible ability to concentrate. As Jim Butler once said to me, there are three things to really beat these big companies as a plaintiff's attorney. There are three things you got to keep in mind: preparation, preparation, preparation. And so it's really a laser beam practice, and we thank them for coming as well. And tomorrow, Joanne Dorosho's coming. She runs the Center for Justice and Democracy. There's just a few tiny groups that have blocked a lot of bad tort reform in the country with the power of knowledge and its dissemination. And as the thing goes further and further, it's a fascinating field. Contract law, the fine print, is now cannibalizing tort law. Teresa Amato and I wrote a piece on this in Trial Magazine. It's quite an ugly situation where the fine print contracts you sign, credit card and transportation, all that, hospital, take away your rights under tort law. So the first responders we have to pay tribute to, they're the plaintiffs, they're the wounded, the disabled, the injured, the sick, and then they find their attorneys who go to court. The problem is that it's not enough to be a trial attorney anymore. You can win battles and lose the entire war. And I always marvel at law schools. They never talk about the dual role of a licensed attorney, which is as an attorney for clients, and as a lawyer, looking out for the bigger questions about the administration of justice. And so that's what this museum is all about. It's to enlist attorneys in their role as officers of the court and as lawyers, looking where is this system going under constant attack by 1,000 cuts and by even strategies to annihilate the whole process and codify it workman's comp style. Finally, I just want to tell you what happened this week to show you the brazen nature of the attack on the law and this tort law. ALEC, ALEC, the front group for right-wing legislators funded by the Koch brothers and others. Now just ask yourself if any group, no matter how nefarious, would ever dare do this in civil rights and civil liberties. They ranked the 50 states, and they gave the highest grades to those states that had the most cruel laws restricting the rights of wrongfully injured people to have their day in court and trial by jury. Just imagine, that was the highest grades were to the cruelest states. They wouldn't dare do that even in these two other areas. These are monetized minds fueled by corporate power, bullying their way over fundamental constitutional civic values that go back to the pre-revolutionary times in our country. I think that sort of lays the groundwork for what this museum is all about. It's not a partisan, it is an institution that strives to promote the facts, the truth, and the values of justice, and above all, civic duties to serve on juries and to understand the importance of what we inherited from our forebears. You know, Learned Hand once said, I would have used the word justice, but Learned Hand once said, quote, "Liberty lies in the hearts of men and women. When it dies there, no law, no court can save it." And that's what the educational function of this museum is, right down to the elementary schools, right down to the dramatic clubs of the high schools, reenacting trials. It's now my pleasure to inject an interesting dimension here. The young generation of plaintiffs' lawyers are going to have to pick up the mantle here. And I've asked 4 young plaintiffs' lawyers. One is not here, unfortunately, couldn't make it in from New York, George Farah. But they're all in their 30s, and they're all learning the skills of trial practice. And I asked them to come up here and just give a 1-minute answer to the following question. What will it take to restore and expand the system of tort law and allow more wrongfully injured people to use it? What will it take to restore and expand the system of tort law and allow more wrongfully injured people to use it? Because the tort system is grossly underutilized. Over 90% of wrongfully injured people never even reach a lawyer. And the challenge of every legal system is to expand its utilization when its purpose is to protect all the people. So can Matt Witherington come up? He's a young trial lawyer from Atlanta, Georgia, and he's going to answer the question.
I think the first thing that we have to recognize is the incredible inroads that have been made by everyone that has come before us, and particularly Ralph Nader. So the obvious answer is we clone Ralph Nader. That's probably the quickest and easiest way to increase justice and availability of the court system to others. If that's not an option, the next thing we have to do is we have to empower others to take advantage of the rights that are already available to them. There's only one duty that we have in the United States, and that's to serve on a jury. We have all the rights and privileges to do or not do anything we want. We only have one responsibility, and it's delineated in both the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and that is to serve on the jury. How do we embrace and allow more people to have access to justice? We do it by making the human calls, for the faces of people who are deprived of justice. We hear about the 15,000 people who are murdered every year. We hear about the 8,000 people who are killed of drug overdoses. We hear about them on our news. We talk about them at our work. What we don't talk about is the 55,000 people who are killed in dangerous workplaces. We don't hear about the 65,000 people who are killed from air pollution. We don't hear about the 100,000 people who are killed from medical incompetence. We don't hear the human side. We don't hear who these individuals are that are in our communities. We believe that murderers are right outside our front door while our neighbors are being killed from air pollution and medical incompetence. So what do we do about it? Well, information is power. The tool of defendants and corporations is through protective orders, through confidential settlements, through hiding documents and information. We have to bring that information to light. We use the courts, we use the trial bar, we use all the tools at our disposal, but that's not enough. We have to give the common citizens a sense of the power that they already have to effectuate positive changes. We do that by teaching them how to use the Freedom of Information Act, how to use small claims courts, and how to demand that they have access to their constitutional right to a jury. So first thing we do is we fight against the defense tactics to hide information and make them publicly available. Then we elect legislators and support organizations that support causes that bring greater justice to everyone, and then we educate the public to it. And if we simply take the unanimous issues that majority of Americans support that have been taken off the table, and this will sound very familiar, by the corporations and put them back on the table, no one wants violent deaths, no one wants preventable deaths, yet the vast majority of people who are killed violently or needlessly are deprived of justice. As Ralph said, 90% of claims are never even brought to the courthouse. I believe that that's the first step that we can take after cloning Ralph Nader.
Thank you, Matt Witherington. You're going to hear a lot more about him in the coming years, I guarantee you. The next young lawyer is Jeb Butler, who practices with his firm, Butler and Tobin, in Atlanta, Georgia. Jeb?
Yep. I recently started my own firm about 15 months ago and have gotten accustomed, thankfully, to people calling and asking me to take their case. And one of the things that I've heard that has surprised me the most is that people will call and they'll tell me, a plaintiff's lawyer, all I do is sue people, they'll tell me, I'm not the kind of person who just sues folks. And I thought about that for a while after the second or third time I heard it, and it occurs to me that what has happened is that we have come far enough as a society that there is a stigma associated with vindicating your rights. The reason we've gotten there is that insurers and corporate defendants, the rich and the powerful who seek to impose their will on the rest of our society, have been able to convince us that seeking to redress your rights is an exercise in greed. Well, they're wrong. That's not the truth. And the jury system is a lot more than that. The jury system, as Mr. Nader and others have said, is a great protector of the rights of all of us. To illustrate that, I want to tell a story. This is the first case I ever tried. I was in law school. I was a third-year law student, and I was working with the public defender's office representing folks who couldn't afford lawyers. And I had a client who was accused of driving under the influence. He was an old black man in Athens, Georgia, who had gotten in a car crash with a rich white girl. And when the police showed up, my client had some beer on his breath, so they booked him for DUI, took him down to the station, arrested him. And I took the case. I didn't think that there was sufficient evidence to prove that he was drinking over the legal limit. So that was my argument. I argued my heart out. We had a great time, had a great trial, fought hard, sat down, and then we entered that phase of the trial where the judge reads the law to the jury. That's about as boring as it's possible to be. I mean, you got a judge up there with this charge. It's like 5 pages, single-spaced, legal technicalities, and he reads it with an inflection about like this, and he goes on and on and on and on. I mean, I love the law. I was emotionally invested in this case, and I was bored. So as I sat there in the courtroom, I was sure the jury wasn't paying attention. So they take the case after that, they go back, and they start deliberating back in the jury room, and I start pacing the halls. I mean, I'm as nervous as I can be. I'm on the phone with my father, Jim Butler, who's a trial lawyer, asking him, how long is this going to take? He laughs at me and says, I don't know. So I keep walking, and I'm so worried that my client is going to be the victim of jurors who cave to prejudice, or jurors who disregard the law. After about 3 hours, the bailiff comes out in the hall, and he says, State against Bradford, y'all come back in. So I come running back into the courtroom because that's my case, and I'm there rapt attention, standing like this as the jury files in, and it turns out they don't have a verdict yet. All they got is a question. So, I'm real let down. And what the jury wanted to know is that they had picked out one little legal technicality in the middle of that 45-minute judge-jury charge that bored me to tears. And they wanted the judge to tell them what legal rebuttable inference they were to draw if the blood alcohol concentration of the defendant was between 0.04 and 0.08. And they were right. That was it. I mean, that was the point of law upon which the whole case turned. I mean, the jury paid better attention to charge than I did. And I went back, after they asked the question, deliberated some more, returned a not guilty verdict. My client was ecstatic. But that is when I learned how much juries care and how hard juries will work to get it right. When it comes to faith in the jury system, I became a believer that day, that moment when they asked that question. So if the question is, what do we need to do to restore faith in the jury system so that people don't call me anymore and have to say, I'm not the kind of person who would normally sue folks? It is to counteract the misinformation that has been perpetrated upon the American people by insurers and corporate interests who seek to stifle the jury system and to end it. The truth is that most of the folks doing that call themselves conservatives, but the jury system is fundamentally a conservative system that they ought to like. I mean, if you believe in small government, and we'll do 5 points. Number 1 is small government. You ought to like the jury system because there ain't no government involved at all. It's 12 private citizens deciding a dispute. If you like accountability, another conservative principle, you ought to like the jury system because that's what juries are all about, is hearing what happened in this dispute between two people and figuring out who to hold accountable. If you like systems that are not intrusive, then you ought to like the jury system because they don't make rules that apply to everybody. They hear a dispute between two parties and they resolve it. It doesn't intrude on anyone else's life. If you like private action, you ought to like the jury system because a lawsuit that ends with the jury is a dispute between private parties that can be resolved upon whatever terms they want at any time they want to resolve it without any government intervention. And if you like the Constitution, then read Amendment number 7, because it's got jury trial right there. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Jeb. Our next young lawyer is Jason Kafuri from Portland, Oregon. He works in the firm of Kafuri McDonald. He's a little tired. McDougall, sorry. I got the McDonald case is in the museum. I had that on my mind. Kafuri and McDougall. He's just come off a 3-week trial where he represented a policeman who was a whistleblower against other police, and he just got a $750,000 verdict. So
today. Yeah, I work with my dad, Greg Kafuri, and his law partner, Mark McDougall. Our law firm is a little bit different than most law firms in Oregon. We actually get to court and do civil jury trials 8 to 10 times a year. A couple years ago, we had 15 trials in 1 year. What's happening in our country is that, especially people from my generation, they don't get to court. We don't get jury trials. Yes, talking about how beautiful the system is and how wonderful the community coming together to make decisions should be is what's sadly missing in our society. And I think that everybody in this room that's a trial lawyer needs to remember what Charlie Merton, who used to be of counsel at our firm, told my dad a few years back. For all these years, we've been operating as trial lawyers with the wrong model. We've been settling our good cases, and we've been taking the tough ones to trial and losing. No, what we need to do is when we have a righteous case, when we have a case that we know we're going to win, when we know we're going to get big media attention for, when we know we're going to get the word out about something that's a huge injustice in our society, that's the case where, you know what, we should all let it all out and take it to the courthouse. This last one that I got a jury verdict today on, I waited all day yesterday in court. The jury was out for 8 hours after a 3-week trial, and I was supposed to leave yesterday to get here at 10 a.m., so I bumped it to the red eye thinking, well, they'll come in with a verdict yesterday. Instead, I come and I get a text message at 2 o'clock today with $750,000 verdict on my cell phone. But this was a righteous case. This was a guy who stood up for his First Amendment rights to challenge bad police officers, a chief of police and others that had papered his file and gotten rid of him. And when he got his job back through arbitration, they went and they Brady listed him, which means they sent to the district attorney 250 pages calling him a liar, which means his law enforcement career as a 37-year-old man was over. And that was it. And I said to myself when I picked up that case, this needs to go to court. This needs to be told. And that's what we did. And what we do, unlike so many law firms in Oregon, and I'm sure around the country, is we embrace media attention for big cases that deserve to be told. And we tell the story. And when Ralph says, what are we going to do to get all of the communities out there to understand that civil jury trials is where justice happens, we need to go out, take our good cases to trial, and tell those stories, get that media attention, and allow people to see that there are cases worth spending all the time and resources out there in this world. I was happy to see that my wife, who can't be here today, sadly, she has a book in school that she's studying, and what's in there under persuasive literature? The hot coffee case. And what's cited? Center for Justice and Democracy. And this is a textbook that's out there. When we talk about what we're going to do to be able to change cultural perceptions about the jury trial, we need to get out there and try cases. We need to try our good cases, and we need to not be afraid of the media, and we need to tell folks that we believe in juries. It's the only thing in our democratic society that's not corruptible, and we all in this room and all the states that we're from need to make a better effort to get out there and stop this vanishing jury trials. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. This little tiny firm basically is the accountability hammer for bad policing in Portland, Oregon. Very few lawyers will take those cases for obvious reasons. And most people don't equate tort law with holding police accountable. It works on government as well as in the commercial sector. I neglected to pay tribute to a great lawyer who's not here, and many of the older lawyers know him. He's J.D. Lee. J.D. Lee was really, like he's done so often in major pioneering breakthroughs in cases, he was the first one to really step up and help us on this tort museum. He came to Winstead, and we sat there and we made hundreds of calls to trial lawyers all over the country. And he, unfortunately, his health prevented him from being here at this time. A wonderful human being as well. Well, I think it's time now to ask Rick to come up, and he's going to introduce two very, very thoughtful members of the bar for a brief presentation. And I don't want to overemphasize the role of lawyers here. The best definition of tort law I have heard comes from my nephew, Tarek, who is not a tort lawyer. He's a PhD in ecological matters. He called tort law, quote, the muscle of justice, end quote. You can deal with that, Jerry.
Thank you. And, you know, it wasn't that long ago that I was one of the younger lawyers, and it's really nice to hear your remarks. I'm encouraged and excited, and keep carrying the torch. You guys are doing great work, truly. Thank you. Thank you. Professor Michael L. Rustad is the Thomas F. Lambert Jr. Professor of Law and co-director of the Intellectual Property Law Concentration at Suffolk University Law School in Boston. He has written a number of books, but one of them in particular stands out this night, this place, for this museum, because Professor Rustad and his colleague Thomas Koenig wrote the excellent, thoughtful, and persuasive book, In Defense of Tort Law. Listen to this. The Defense of Tort Law, written in 2001, that recently was the first book to systematically examine the sociological, legal, and policy ramifications of the so-called tort reform movement. And as Ralph just said, tort reform, or in the film, it's really tort deform. This book demonstrates that for 200 years, going back to its roots in the English common law, tort law has been the public's guardian against abuses of power. And Mike's occupation, he's the Thomas F. Lambert Jr. Professor of Law. Remember Tom on Torts? You older trial lawyers, Tom on Torts. This is the Thomas F. Lambert Jr. Professor of Law. He holds a Juris Doctor, a law degree from Suffolk University Law School, and a master's in law from Harvard University, clerked for Judge William Doyle of the United States Court of Appeals for the 10th Circuit, and has been a professor at Suffolk since 1988. He is not merely a scholar, and a good one, but an engaged and active voice in defense of tort law. Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Michael Rustad.
Well, first I'd like to congratulate the Nader family and the founders of the American Museum of Tort Law, who seek to preserve the past, present, and future of tort law. As Justice Holmes reminds us, in order to know what the law is, we must know what it has been and what it tends to become. A museum of tort law is a sociological and it's a cultural opportunity for insights into our civil justice system and our shared cultural heritage. A tour of the American Museum of Tort Law will confirm that tort lawsuits serve a useful, productive, and economically efficient role in our society. William Lloyd Prosser, in his classic treatise on tort law, said that perhaps more than any other branch of the civil law, tort law is a battleground of social theory. Tort deformers, as Ralph calls them, have captured the public imagination with their creative and misleading horror stories. They call them tort horror stories. One such scary tale is the McDonald's hot coffee case, in which a clumsy old woman spilled hot coffee on her lap and unjustly won punitive damages. The tort law exhibits are counterweights, refuting the half-truths, quarter-truths, and outright lies of the tort deformers. Tort deformers use the hot coffee case as their poster child. The case is so familiar that it was a subject of Seinfeld episode when Kramer filed suit after burning himself smuggling a hot latte into a movie theater. But the public never did know about the dire nature of Stella Liebeck's injuries. They didn't know that by the time that she was injured by that hot coffee, that there had been 700 prior similars. And that hot coffee was not served at ordinary temperature. It was served as superheated, 180 to 190 degrees, as Joanne Dorschel noted in the documentary. And the exhibit shows that the coffee that burned her was so dangerously hot to cause third-degree burns, so hot that 14% of her body, including her inner thighs and genitals, skin was so burned away that layers of muscle and fatty tissue were harmed. These are napalm-like burns. When I show the exhibits to my students who think McDonald's is a frivolous lawsuit when they enter law school, students get religion very soon, the civil religion of tort law. In the past few decades, tort law has become part of our popular culture with films like A Civil Action, about the Woburn tainted water case, Aaron Brockovich, story of a California toxic tort case. My first brush with a tort story that became a Hollywood film was Silkwood versus Kerr McGee. It became the subject of an Academy Award-winning movie. I was actually only a year out of law school, clerking for Judge William E. Doyle, 10th Circuit. Judge Doyle told me before we tackled that massive record, he said, "Watch the film." He thought it was accurately recounted in the Silkwood movie that starred Cher and Meryl Streep. She was a lab analyst in Oklahoma. A lab was owned by Kerr McGee, and they were producing pins used in nuclear reactors. She monitors herself while she's working with a glove box, grinding and polishing these plutonium pellets for these fuel rods, and discovered she was contaminated. And the film focuses on her psychic agony as a whistleblower. On November 13, 1974, Karen Silkwood was killed in a suspicious car accident as she was delivering documents about the plant's health and safety violations to a New York Times reporter. The tort case that was filed by Karen Silkwood's estate against the Oklahoma facility was to recover for plutonium contamination. At trial, the director said there were 4.4 kilograms of plutonium missing in inventory count. A little plutonium goes a long ways, enough to contaminate the entire state of Oklahoma. Silkwood's attorney, Jerry Spence, compared the escape of plutonium to having a lion in your backyard. If you keep a lion in your backyard, you better have a strong cage. What he said is under the strict liability theory, Kerr McGee could not defend because they had a strong cage. As with the Roman law of harboring wild animals, if the lion got away, Kerr McGee must pay. It's that simple, and that's the law. They eventually did award the estate $555,000 in compensatory damages and astonishing $10 million in punitive damages, but the 10th Circuit reversed the entire award, saying that it was preempted by federal nuclear regulations. The U.S. Supreme Court then reversed the 10th Circuit. And so on remand from the Supreme Court, I was the clerk that wrote the dissenting opinion. The 10th Circuit held that this award could not stand. So, tort stories like Silkwood are important to tell. The role of punitive damages in constraining corporate wrongdoers that have exposed the community to non-reciprocal risk. The escape of plutonium constitutes an abnormally dangerous activity. The case also reflects a moral and a sociological judgment about what corporate responsibility is for non-reciprocal risks. And finally, the role of punitive damages and punishing and deterring habitual corporate wrongdoing. So this museum is about the struggle of tort law, its deep cultural and political divisions in American society. When I grew up, cars were incredibly dangerous. In fact, Ralph Nader's Unsafe at Any Speed documents that. But it was product liability that led to safety belts and all kinds of other improvements. The field of strict product liability didn't evolve until the 1960s for the victims who placed dangerously defective products into the stream of commerce. So as the exhibits that we'll see tomorrow will demonstrate, tort law does more than just compensate. The hidden face of tort law is its public role in uncovering, punishing, and deterring corporate misconduct without requiring a rigid government bureaucracy. Tort law is, as it's always been, forward-looking, with the ability to adapt to new social problems and conditions. Progressive tort law brings common sense to the common law, and that will be confirmed by the exhibits you'll see tomorrow. Thank you.
I had the pleasure of meeting one of our founders, Ed Rishi, just 2 months ago when he came up to meet me and visit the museum. At that time, only the exterior was completed. There was nothing inside, so there was very little to see. Nonetheless, Ed was remarkably gracious and gave generously of his time, and I greatly enjoyed talking to him about the museum. He may not know it even now, but at that moment, he became one of my key advisors. And Ed, you will be hearing from me as we progress. Edward M. Ricci, attorney, practices primarily in Florida, but will go where justice demands. He is nationally known as a consumer justice attorney and has carried the fight to automobile companies, drug makers, and insurance companies with skill, zeal, and passion. He has served as the national chairman of the Products Liability Section of the American Association for Justice and has been a faculty member at the National College of Advocacy. He has been profiled in the best lawyers in America for more than 20 years and is AV rated by Martindale and Hubble, which is, as you know, the highest possible rating. Ed has long been active in supporting charitable and nonprofit organizations, Georgetown University, where he attended law school, Public Citizen, the Palm Beach Opera, and a number of others which I won't mention because I'm afraid I'll miss some. He is actively involved. Recently, he and his wife have become very actively involved in the Scripps Research Institute, and in fact, he and I were discussing that briefly this evening. I didn't write down the exact thing that you have become, so I won't say it, but he is a strong supporter of the Scripps Research Institute, which has a campus in Palm Beach County. When I saw Ed earlier this evening, I said I would both flatter him and be totally honest, and I have been. He is a remarkable friend, a scholar, a gentleman, and one hell of an attorney. Ladies and gentlemen, Ed Ricci.
I have a problem with these kinds of introductions because every time I hear them, they sound more and more like an obituary. But putting all of that aside, I do want to tell you a couple of things. First of all, I'm very appreciative of what's going on here. But I'm going to say a couple of things tonight that some of you may not want to hear. There are reasons why the bar, the plaintiff's bar, has been so brutalized over the last 25 or 30 years. And we know what a lot of those reasons are, and we are guilty. I live in Palm Beach, Florida. And of course, when people say, oh, Palm Beach, there's lots of money there, which is true. But what you don't want to see are the successful plaintiffs' lawyers in Palm Beach riding around in Rolls Royces and Lamborghinis and living in $5 and $10 million mansions on the ocean and giving interviews to the press as to why this verdict was the biggest verdict anybody ever got in medical mal, why this is the biggest verdict anybody ever got in a conventional tort case, because all of that kind of stuff aggrandizes the attorneys, and it completely misses what we do. It doesn't convey any message to the public about justice, fairness, equality, the need for compensation. Some of you know Bob Brenner. Bob Brenner was one of the chief scientists in the early days of NHTSA, and Joan worked for him. And when he passed away 25 years ago, Joan and I were asked to give eulogies at his funeral. And one of the things I said then, and I say over and over again, is the fundamental foundation of tort law can be found in the book of Genesis. When God calls to Cain and he says, "Where is your brother Abel?" the smart aleck answer he gets is, "Am I my brother's keeper?" And the answer to that question is obviously yes. And my point is, if we are going to go out and project whom we are to the public, then we've got to repeat that resounding answer that goes down the centuries. Yes, we are our brother's keeper. That is the beginning of the moral foundation of tort law. Well, that's wonderful, because tonight I am preaching to my friends. We all agree. But what do we do to change the public perception? 10 years ago, I put a group together of 10 law firms, and we each put up $35,000, and we created an LLC, and we went around the country conducting focus groups asking this question: why does the public hate trial lawyers? And the resounding answer again and again and again was, we don't trust them. All they're interested in is themselves. They spend all the money on themselves. They'll sue anybody. They don't care who it is as long as they can make a buck. They're not really interested in justice. They're not interested in fairness. They're interested in themselves, their own egos, and their own wealth. Now, you can say what you want about a tort museum, and I am a great supporter of the tort museum. I think I was the second contributor among the founders over the years. But a tort museum in and of itself is not going to solve the problem. The problem has to be solved by us going back to our bar associations, local, state, and national, and convince our brothers and sisters that we've got to change the message that we send to the public. And that message has to be not that we're interested in how much money we can make, not that we're interested in aggrandizing our reputation, but we've got to let them know that our role is to see that justice is given to those who are in need. And that's not easy to do. So when we conducted this research 10 years ago, and those of you who want to know a little bit more about it can ask me tomorrow, because I'll give you the materials. What we realized is that when we are addressing the public, when we are addressing the media, we can't talk about ourselves. We've got to talk about justice, freedom, the founding fathers, how attorneys were among those who wrote the Constitution, those who wrote the Declaration of Independence, crafted the initial laws that established this country and gave us the freedoms that we have today. If we don't do that, ladies and gentlemen, this tort museum will be a nice little place in a small town in Connecticut where you can go for a visit some Sunday afternoon or during the week when you've got nothing better to do. If you do like Joan and I did tonight, if we got on I-91 and went the wrong way, you can go up to the Trolley Museum, which is about 15 minutes from here. But that's all it's going to be. You know, it's not going to be the vehicle that we want it to be, which is to preserve and to expand the reach that we can bring to the public to see that justice is rendered. And with that, I wish you good luck. I will do everything I can, but I will tell you right now, unless we change who we are and how we go about projecting ourselves, and our trial associations change the message that they send, it ain't going to happen. Thank you.
Couldn't have said better myself. Thank you, Ed. Yeah, obviously it's going to have to take lots of people all over the country, and not, I would say not just lawyers. A couple quick things. If you detected an aspersion on a small town, that isn't what Ed really meant. If people say, why have it in Winsted other than that's our hometown? It's because rural areas and small towns have been marginalized by this magnet called the mega city. And so they suck all the oxygen out of these areas in more ways than one. And it's very important to place these institutions, especially in the internet age, where you can stream and reach everybody, in small communities. Someone said, why didn't you put this in Washington, D.C.? I said, fine, add another 2 zeros to the budget. So I'm happy to see my classmate here, Fred Silverio, one of old family friends, Bud Mooney, from town here, and above all, Larry Hendrickson, who's not my classmate, but he worked with my brother to establish the community college here, which is the first community college in Connecticut. So. Secondly, there are pledge cards. If you want to go back home and get people interested in it after you go through the museum, I think you will be super enthusiastic. There are pledge cards that you can give to them and have them support our Stage 2 expansion that Rick mentioned. Third, I am obligated just to say to anybody here, anybody who wants to come up and make a quick comment or make an announcement, you can do so right now if you'd like. Time is late, but I do want to keep it open to anybody who wants to say anything. Anybody? Okay. And there's going to be a picture of all the founders. So after we break up, if you can all come up here, and the photographer will take a few pictures for posterity. Those of you who are staying over Saturday night and want to extend the informal exchange that you saw in the reception time, go to Charlene Lavoie, our community lawyer of over 20 years here in Winsted. We'll take your name, and we'll have dinner at the Monaco restaurant on Main Street in Winsted, and you can talk with one another. This is a reunion for a lot of people, and so they haven't seen each other. They've been involved in all these battles, and this will give them a chance to speak. If you're going to stay over Saturday night, it'll be about 7:30, and Charlene will give you the details. And finally, I neglected to pay tribute to Art Malella, who is from the Smithsonian, just recently retired, and he's giving him the value of his advice. It's really interesting to see somebody who's worked in museums all the years that he has, and he headed and founded the Lemuelson Center on Innovation in the Smithsonian, to get his take on this museum, which is like no museum ever before. It's almost understates its mission with the word museum. We hope that with the context that Ed Rishi pointed out, all over the country, 60,000 plaintiff lawyers. I would bring defense lawyers into this because they are also officers of the court. And it is very important to hold the insurance companies up to their responsibilities for loss prevention, which is their fundamental mission, and they're not paying attention to it the way they did here in Connecticut in the 19th century when they went to the boilers of all these new factories and they said, we're not insuring you unless you raise the safety standards of your boilers, and here's our engineers to enforce that condition. And you can see how far from that the insurance companies and their financialization have moved from their original mission, which was engineering underwriters, engineering safety, fire code prevention. And when I was a law student, I came across the Liberty Mutual car, and this was by the vice president of engineering up in Boston. And I said, what in the world is this? And it was a four-door Chevrolet that this engineer, Mr. Crandall, crusty old New Englander, had retrofitted with seat belts, padded dash panels, collapsible steering columns, all the things that we take for granted. And I told him, what are you doing this for? And you know, and these Yankees are extremely brief in their response. And he said, saving money and saving lives. That's what we got to hold them up for. And in the stage 2 expansion, we want to have a section on the best moments of loss prevention by past insurance companies. You want to say anything in conclusion, Ed?
No.
Yes, I do. Rick? Yep.
Rick. I want to thank all of you for coming. If you are interested in having dinner at Monaco's tomorrow after the museum closes at 7, please see Charlene. If you are attending the lunch and the convocation in the afternoon, please be sure you have one of those blue parking passes for your car to get you in there. Please bring that with you because it's going to be tricky without that. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Ralph, for your vision. Have a pleasant evening, everybody. Founders up here, please, for the photo.